Awesome.
All right, I am here, Robbie Jeanette, with my friend Aaron Magner from the Disco Biscuits, is what he's most known for, though you have many other things that you're known for. Aaron, welcome. How are you?
Hey, thank you, Robbie. I'm great. Good to be here. Good to see you. Good to catch up with you. I'm excited for this.
Yes, and you and I met in the late 90s. Our bands were fledgling. I had a band called Rudy, and we played at, I believe, the Grape Street Pub in Philadelphia. We drove up.
Wow, that's an amazing memory. I do not have that memory. Did we hang at the Grape Street Club in
We did. That's
Philadelphia?
that's where we met, and you got to
That's
meet
where we
Ray Conga Diaz, rest in peace, and
may he rest in peace. I remember Ray, of course. Yeah.
yeah, and then a couple years later, Rudy opened for the Disco Biscuits around Florida. We did some shows. We had a lot of fun, and ever since, you and I have kept in random touch. Always wish it was more. So I
No.
wanted to talk to you a little bit about your journey into becoming who you are. And when you were young, I like to start with everybody when they were young. You are a learned musician, and so obviously, when you're starting music, you come into it from a natural.
Stunted learned.
Yes. What was your educational journey in music in terms of formal? What kind of lessons did you take or whatnot as a kid?
So my next door neighbor was the neighborhood piano teacher. And so, we all started with recorder, right? All
Right.
the neighborhood kids. And then we moved on pretty quickly to piano and, the little books with,
Yep.
animals associated with
Yeah.
them. And then, learning melodies and everything like that.
Yeah.
And I guess I took to it more, not to say that I had a precocious talent that was identified, just I enjoyed it. And where everybody else kind of dropped out, I stayed with it for a little bit. Um, and hold on one second. You're gonna edit this, right? I'm just trying to.
No, we're just going. We're just
We're just
rolling. This
going.
is
Okay.
casual
So
conversation.
so yeah, so she was great and kind of like set me on my way. And then once I realized that I did have some sort of precocious talent, that my dad wanted to help illuminate, he brought me downtown. Temple had some sort of conservatory downtown, and he found me a nice studious teacher. And I stuck with her and my newfound, like, oh, I could do this as a whatever, as a
Right.
professional, as an 11-year-old professional.
Yeah.
And I very quickly got uninterested in it, and I remember telling my parents, and they were totally cool. I was like, "Hey, don't want to do this anymore." And as a
Yeah.
parent, right? Like, where is that line where let your kid choose their own destiny, and
Right.
where is that point as a parent where you're like, "Oh, kid, you don't know any better. I'm
Right.
going to push you to do the thing that I know you need to do, but you don't know you need to do it."
Right.
But my parents let me explore that for myself, and
Good.
I took about, I don't know, a year and a half off, right, 2 years maybe, and randomly, for no particular reason, I was probably bored. I was like, hey, I want to get a different piano teacher. And so they, searched around and they found me a piano teacher that his name is Peter Simpkins. And I would say that that man changed the course of my life, as had other teachers subsequently.
Yeah.
But he's also the a little bit more expanded of the neighborhood, if you will.
Yeah.
But he has set a lot of professional musicians on their way,
So
as
what
well as a lot of avocacious musicians.
what was it about him as a teacher that helped you like open up, and also what was different about him as a teacher from the other teachers that you had been learning from?
Okay. Um, Number one, he was new, and
Yeah.
I have always kind of felt like after you study with a teacher for some period of time that can vary, um, it's time to move on. Like, not to say you've gotten everything out of that person, but the
Right.
relationship is frequently time to move on.
Yeah.
So we were still honeymooning in the student teacher
Right.
relationship, if you will, and he exposed me to jazz, and that was really the turning point. That was the flash in the pan,
Did you
right?
get it as a listener, not just as a student? Did you get jazz like when it came to you, where you're like, oh, this is great, or did it take you some time to break
Oh,
into?
definitely. It definitely took me some time, but over the course of, and we were doing this hybrid, like, part classical, part like introduction to jazz.
Right.
And after just a few months, I was like, yo, I don't want to do that classical thing anymore. Like, I want to immerse myself in this jazz thing.
Right.
And he was studying with like a guy named Jimmy Amity, who has this, like, had this methodology, right? Similar to like a Barry Harris, actually, right? But
Okay.
he was like local to this area. And so I studied this curriculum, if you will, as like a young teenager. And then, high school, and, you start playing with other people that play music, and
Right.
figuring that out, and, testing yourself. And then, I did get another teacher in high school that was a professional jazz musician, and he
Got
was
it.
incredible, named Michael Frank. And he introduced me to his scene in Philadelphia. They were,
Cool.
20 years older than me.
Right.
And so I was the kid that would go down and, like, get to have, like, a sit-in while they would, like, go to the bar,
Right.
or
Yeah.
whatever. Or throw me the gigs that they, couldn't do or didn't want to do, or whatever
Right.
it was, right? So
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons that I stayed in Philadelphia, to go to college in the first place. I
Yeah.
went to University of Pennsylvania, which is where I met the Disco Biscuits, and I hadn't really played rock, in a real rock band, or
Yeah.
even rock music on piano, even Grateful Dead. I was always into the Grateful Dead also at a precocious age, right?
Right.
Older cousin loved it,
Right.
and therefore I loved it. And,
Yeah.
at 11 years old, I was also into the Grateful Dead, and never got off that bus.
Yes.
But what's interesting is that I also never really learned that catalog until later in life, when,
Right.
exposed to different Grateful Dead projects and stuff like that, I
Right.
really had to know it.
Yeah.
And that was an interesting process, because it was so in my DNA at the time anyway,
Right.
So, like, as we grow older as musicians, I feel like we hear different things in our heads. Our sense of harmony becomes better.
Yep.
Our ability to, pick things out and just go to the piano and, like, know how something goes,
Yeah.
And so I thought that was kind of like an interesting juxtaposition of being a little bit older and wiser musically to
Yeah.
be able to approach that catalog.
Yeah, it makes sense. So going back to when you were taking lessons, and obviously you're not the only person that started out in classical, because that's what everybody is supposed to do, and then, got out. At some point, you got into improv and improvising. And when you were young, at what point were you sitting down and creating your own music, just making stuff up
Probably from the beginning.
from the
I'm
beginning?
pretty sure that's how my parents knew that, like, oh, he likes the piano, or he's good
Right.
at piano, or whatever, right? When you can and my dad kind of, like, still brags about this, and I don't even remember it being true, because he brags about it in such a way, like, look at my child freak. He can recall any song that you tell him, but, being like, oh, he was always able to play things, just out of, like, memory alone.
Yeah.
I don't really recall being able to do that, but, making things up, improvising on a melody, again, with this, teacher I was talking about when I was 13, 14.
Right.
And, him just introducing me to the general concepts of improvisation.
Right.
Like, I mean, it took me decades to really feel comfortable doing this improvisation,
Right.
well into, being in a somewhat improvisational rock band and playing, jazz at a little bit higher of a level in
Yeah.
high school and college, right?
Yeah.
Again, very stunted understanding of jazz, but I feel
Right.
like that's what makes my voice in jazz kind of unique.
Yeah.
Right. More of a friend of jazz than
Yeah.
than a jazzer, and therefore I don't feel the imposter aspect of it, and I can, the jazz police can stay away, because
I mean-
I'm not really,
There's a little bit of fake it till you make it when you go and improvise,
100%. Well, let's talk about that, right?
Yeah.
Like, it is, I think there's a lot of fake it till you make it, whether you want to recognize that, or not in
Yeah.
life, right?
Yeah.
And, I mean, I would say, in improvisations, I'm still kind of faking it, right? Like, and I mean, where's that line between faking it and flow state, right?
That's a great question.
I'm saying faking it because I can't necessarily back up every single deliberate note that I played with
Well,
a reason why.
right. I mean, when you say faking it, sometimes it's a matter of reverting to patterns and formulas and things that we
Yep.
are comfortable running. And then the improv part comes from when we're in that flow state. But I think it's like a balance. Like I play a lot of blues and boogie woogie. So I do different stuff than that, but I have to keep that up as a singular pursuit in order to keep that, nice and oiled in my wheelhouse. I lost your video. Where'd you
Yeah, I
go?
just saw that. That's weird. I don't know.
Hey.
Okay.
Too good looking for the camera. So there's this idea of making music, and then there's this idea of understanding it and having this knowledge. And a lot of people who avoid lessons or being more learned do so because they're afraid of ruining the magic. Where the opposite is true, it's like being a wizard and you're learning to cast spells, if that's makes sense. So
I mean, yeah.
so
Listen, I hold that thought for 1 second. I mean, just that analogy of us being wizards and casting spells.
yeah,
Somebody approached me this summertime and with he's whatever concert that he saw, and he said that this is the closest thing to black magic that exists. And I thought about it, and that's kind of like stayed with me, and perhaps that's what attracts everybody to
yeah,
improvisational music is like, how is this even possible? I'm witnessing it, but
right,
how do you guys know what even to do?
yeah.
And I can't necessarily answer that question either. I could expound upon it, but I don't know.
Well, you look back and you can listen to tapes and look, you take a band, well, I mentioned Fish. This is a band who's been together over 40 years, improvising together, the same four guys, and you don't have in the world another example of the same four people improvising together for that long. So there's stuff that happens on stage with them that I'm sure that it's as unconscious as possible. And they listen back and like, wow, that all just like locked together. And
Hmm.
you, I'm sure every night doing in essentially different versions of the same songs and letting them flow and letting them be and stuff like that, you do get into that flow state. But I'm wondering, when you were starting out, were you drawn to understanding it or were you drawn more to the finger painting creation of it? Did you want to know
Uh,
what made it work or were you just like, screw it, I'm painting. This is awesome.
well, more of the latter. I think that there was more of a struggle and a continued struggle with the first, wanting to
Yeah.
like understand uh, what is it that I'm not doing that I can also be doing, and
Yeah.
that's a question that I still ask for myself.
Yeah.
And there's concepts in, music and improvisation and theory and jazz that just go way over my head. Some of them I try to immerse myself in. I mean,
Yeah.
this little thing that we carry around with us is really fucking cool, as
Yeah.
everybody wants to spout information that they have. Unfortunately, there's a lot of noise that does come with it, but
Yeah.
you know when you find somebody that is speaking truth, or somebody that you resonate with,
Yeah.
albeit an influencer, there's some fucking high level didactic concepts out there that
Yeah.
like you can learn just by following somebody. Like, that's incredible, but that's always been somewhat daunting to me, right? Because
Right.
I stopped my musical growth, my educational, my academic musical growth
Right.
the second that I got into college, and then started to explore this other territory of,
Right.
jam band or improvisational band, whatever. And still playing jazz, but that kind of like started to fall by the wayside a little bit. So, um, yeah,
Well,
it's like that's kind of what I'm talking about. There's like this stunted thing where I want to learn more, but I know that that's something that I should have learned more about in my formative years.
look,
And I
there's some concepts that are meant to measure and analyze things in music that at the end of the day, it's cool to look at, but it doesn't help you. Like the circle of fifths, you can create that out of music and make it a nice circle, but how is that going to help you necessarily as a player to look at it, and to study it? So
Yep, exactly.
there's so we look at concepts, we can kind of notice things, but look, if you could measure how far your gas pedal is from the floor at all different times, does that make you a better driver? There's once you're in the flow state in the wheel and you're driving, a lot of those things are there, they don't matter as much in the moment. So the
Hmm.
people who get super analytical versus not, we could have that discussion. But going back to when you got into jazz,
Yeah.
what would have been and not necessarily piano player, but the first jazz musician that you could kind of understand, or like that you kind of got their phrasing and what they were doing?
Okay. So Bill Evans for melodic phrasing.
Mm.
Red Gardner for rhythmic comping. That was a really, really big one for me to be able to understand. God, I hadn't thought of that name in years. I
Or
love
you
that
mean
question.
Red Garland?
Red Garland, thank you.
Great,
Um,
great player.
so yeah, and he had a left-hand comp that I was kind of able to understand,
Yeah,
both the voicings as well where the accents were, and I was able to emulate it and use that as kind of like a baseline for how I can improvise over changes at
yeah,
a young age. And I remember being kind of overwhelmed by Herbie and Chick,
yeah,
very intrigued, right? Like, oh my
yeah,
God, that is a sound coming from the same instrument with the same keys. And, and I had questions and I would immerse myself and I would listen, but I truly didn't understand how that was accomplished. And,
yeah.
and I went on to some studies. I, learned a little bit more, I guess, like, took a summer at Eastman School of Music and,
That'll
was
help.
able to like, that will help. Right. So I was able to like, dive into things a little bit more. Um, but it was really Red Garland that kind of changed my concept there. It was Bill Evans in terms of melodic phrasing.
Yeah.
That was a game changer for me, because it's
How about a non-piano player,
okay.
guitar player or a horn player or somebody that, like, I'll give you, for instance, I interviewed a guy named Marian Petrescu, great piano player, and he said when he was a kid, he was able to memorize all of Ray Brown's bass lines on all these jazz records his parents were playing, and that was how he connected
Mm,
an instrument he doesn't even touch or play. So was
mm.
there somebody that stood out when in your formative years musically that informed you of your music knowledge that was not keys based?
I mean, nobody that stands out, I guess, like as I start talking, I'll see. I feel like when I was a teenager and you were soaking up all the music that you were exposed to in as organic of a way as we used to, become exposed to music in the
Yeah,
first place, um, it was. I have to speak genre specific as opposed
yeah,
to a specific, musician. So it was definitely like, classic rock, like, Led Zeppelin and The Who at, finding out about those bands at 14 or
yeah,
whatever. And then like going down a rabbit hole of all the, there's lots of albums, there's lots of great songs, and there's lots of cool, um, factoids, right?
yeah.
Like I said, the Grateful Dead, and that was like the joke is the only music that I would listen to in high school was the Grateful Dead and jazz, and it's not that wrong.
Right.
um, I remember, new age music being
Yep.
like a big thing. So, Ray Lynch, right, and
Right.
Deep Breakfast, and I
Deep
remember that
breakfast.
being like a game changer for me.
Did you listen to
You know,
George Winston at all?
I love George Winston. I love me a good December for
Oh
sure.
man, those
Uh,
records so good.
um, I mean, but
The simplicity of George
Jean-Luc
Winston.
Ponty,
Oh yeah.
like, right? Like, I was like, oh my God, how's that even possible?
Right.
Yngwie Malmsteen, right?
Right.
Same thing. I remember being like, oh my God, they may as well be Paganini, right?
Right. Playing the Caprices.
Um, um, Yeah, I don't know whether it's been, a specific musician that I've been so influenced by that I could even, name him or her.
Well,
I
it's not say influenced by where it still resonates in your work, but sometimes, like when I first heard the Allman Brothers, I I could understand how Dickie Betts, like I could kind of play along and
mm,
kind of comp it a little bit because I'd been a Billy
hmm
Joel Elton John guy, so I was,
hmm
doing it the other way. But once you get into playing along with a record and you can kind of do your own thing along with it, all of a sudden it's like, wait a second, something happening here.
hmm
So a lot of times for people like yourself and myself, there's a compulsion to doing music. Like we're compelled beyond all things. And then you balance that by the intention of the things you do to better your chops, better your skills. So what's your compulsion intention relationship these days?
Uh, I mean, okay. I feel like I'm gonna go on a bit of a tangent here.
Do it.
Um, my compulsion is to create. I think that I'm addicted to um both that moment, right? That God particle of a song or of an idea. I'm addicted to then following that through and executing it, perhaps in many different ways and perhaps with many different collaborators even along the way,
Yeah.
and then getting to a final point, if you will, where it's complete, if a
Yep.
song could ever be complete, and you look back on it and you're like, oh my God, you remember where we were when it was like, oh my God, that's gonna be the thing, right? Like,
Right.
I love that. I love
Yeah.
that. That is what I'm addicted to, and I feel like I deal with all the other bullshit of life and that the extreme bullshit of this industry in
Yes.
order to um hope to be able to provide myself another opportunity to have that relived experience of create, execute, potentially collaborate, and then complete,
Right.
Um, and and that's a new thing that I've identified, right? As a creative, I feel like in previous years, where I've been more frustrated, or frustrated and inspired or whatever. It's more of uh talking about like the hustle
Yeah.
of the industry in order to survive,
Right.
right? And once I realized that, like, whatever, right? Like the
Yeah.
pandemic and survival during the pandemic, if you will, definitely changed my perspective onto life,
Right.
especially as a creative.
Yep.
And you know once I realized that, like, this is what I am here to do, or this is whatever, this is what I like to do, this is
Right.
what I am,
Right.
and therefore, and I've figured it out in many different pivots all
Yeah.
along 30 plus year career. So that gives me a little bit more confidence that I'll be able to continue to figure it out, though I
Yeah.
still definitely have that like insecurity that like it's becoming harder and harder and da 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 da, and is this live industry even going to be here anymore, and all
And
that.
yet, and
But
yet you guys are doing great touring. You did the West Coast for the first time and came back, and it's been, you have a fan base that is there for you. But I think, you guys service that fan base by evolving, keeping it interesting,
mm,
not forgetting your roots. It's not like you play Little Betty Boop every night, but you definitely have evolved as a band. I mean, I saw you back in the day and seeing you at the Roxy and stuff, like the danceability, the everything like that works and gels and the flow state of the band. It's just great. And you guys are not resting on one thing. There's this exploration. So I want to go back to
sure.
the wizard comment.
Yeah.
A lot of musicians, again, I feel like they don't want to learn more because they don't want it to become clinical. So how once you know how things work and you have a better understanding of musical structure and stuff, how do you keep wonder alive? That finger painting. I go back to, calling it that finger painting mentality when you're a kid and you're
Mhm.
just into it. How do you keep that alive while also knowing all of the intellectual, educational information that you know?
Okay. Well, the first thing that I would say, if you were somebody asking, like, what my kid plays an instrument and they're really good, what would you
Right.
recommend? I would say play with as many different people as possible.
Yep.
You're like better than you, worse than you, different instruments, same instruments, whatever it is, you will learn a hell of a lot along the way.
Yeah.
You probably won't realize it at the time, and it might be incredibly delayed, how you learn from that person, but
Right.
you will.
Yeah.
How do I keep things more fruitful
Or
in
organic. Like like
organ
yeah, like you know what you're doing, you know scales, you know chords, you know all these things, but there's an organicness to creation.
100%. So there's lots of different ways to do that, right?
Right.
The David Bowie and Brian Eno way of like picking a card that had, some random adjective on it and you
Right.
had to do that.
Right.
For me, if I were to turn my camera around and you see like all these synths on my wall, it's that, right? It's like painting with a different palette. When working on a track, right? I was doing a track yesterday, and I don't know where it's going, and
Right.
that's part of the fun of solving a puzzle, right? And
Right.
there is no right way, so and it's kind of just me, so I could try anything that I want,
Right.
and it's nice to, okay, what is the Hydra synth going to sound like on that
Right.
one,
Yeah.
and for me, and specifically the Hydra synth, and this is the example that I'm giving for it because I am more unfamiliar with the hydrosynth that sits atop my stack there than I
Got
am
it.
with all my other keyboards. So that to me, it's not like I don't understand how it works, but definitely
Right.
not confident in it. And that to me will generate some sort of creative inspirato, right? I,
I
I
love
feel
that.
that way sometimes about different plugins, and what I've noticed is the second that I get a new plugin, I'm like, oh my God, this is cool. Let me like explore it, right? Like I
Yeah.
feel like I need to be recording all that because you're just like, oh, cool. What does this patch do? And you're like, oh, wow, that's so cool. What does this
Yeah.
patch do? Whoa. Oh my God, that's going to make a great beginning of a song. What does this
Right.
patch do? And you've moved on to 47 different, really unique and inspiring ideas,
Yeah.
right? Like, how much do we look at ourselves and say, that idea that I just had was an inspiring idea, as opposed to, that's an idea, and
Yeah.
I could expound upon that idea and probably make a song with it. But like, where is that, like, go hold yourself to a higher, status, right? Like, where's that, ingenious idea? We all
Right.
have it in us, so let's search a little bit harder for it. And,
I
I don't
love
think I do that all the time, but it'd be nice to hold myself up to that
Well, I love that
claim.
idea that you take something you're unfamiliar with, plugins, whatever, and you're like, let's try this. Let's like trying on different hats. So there's,
100%.
when you're creating sounds, sometimes there's like, okay, I know the sound I want. I have a basic grasp or a deep grasp of synthesis. Let me get that sound versus a sound pops up. You're like, whoa, what is this? And you might tweak it a little, but so it's like, do you chase sounds or do sounds chase you? Like,
I mean, I feel like that keeps me on my toes with the Disco Biscuits all the time, right? Like, for better or for worse, I don't know.
right?
Let's say, well, a jam will begin,
Yep.
and every time that jam begins, I'm on a new sound. Again,
Interesting.
better or worse, I could make, there's some where I'll go to that, go to the same patch, but
Right.
frequently it's like, okay, where was I just then? Where am
Yep.
I going? What haven't I played this set that I'm going to want to play?
Right.
And so it's not such, my friend Jamie Shields from the New Deal calls it
Yeah.
random patch generator,
I love
where
that.
he'll just go to something and be like, that's what it sounds like, and then he'll just like dial it in, right?
Yeah.
That's sort of what I do, but I have a little bit more, or I mean, he does that on a Juno 106, right? So it doesn't
Nice.
have a readout,
Right.
of what patch it's going to be, and
Right.
nor did he have any notes that like, bank 1 dash
Right.
7 is going to be the sound that I play. So I have a little bit more, organizational things here, right? I know, okay, this bank is going to be ARPs, and this will be leads, and this will be pads,
Right.
right? But, within that, I know, oh, this one is the one that I use frequently, but I'm not positive what it's going to officially sound like in that moment in that song until I, play the first note. And
That's a
then
lot of mystery. That's a lot of like flying by the seat of your pants.
I guess so, but it's always kind of what I've done, right? And
Yeah.
and I will say, for anybody listening that could be like, this guy's an idiot. There's so many programs that can help you be like, you push one button on your iPad and it will flash all of your keyboards to the
Right.
same place. And I get that, and I
Yep.
do have some of those shortcuts where I need them.
Right.
But again, with this, jam band like anything goes ethos, and I have enough prowess on the synthesis now,
Right.
and I enjoy being challenged by the synthesis too, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I say this a lot, most of the time I make the synthesizer my bitch, and sometimes it makes me, its, and
Yeah.
right, and I like that when the synth like bites back, right?
Yeah.
And it can provide for some unintended happy thoughts.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm kind of like, I'm always sculpting, I would say, on
Yeah.
any of the synths, and that gives me the flexibility to blend from one to the other, and to also paint along to what everybody else is painting, right? It's not just
Yeah,
me, right?
right,
So that's the other thing. Like that sound might have worked, last week in that track, but
right,
now we're in a different room and, everybody has different pedals on and the
right.
energy is different, right?
Yep.
So, I could do anything that I want. But yeah, it does sound a little bit, walking on a tightrope without a net. But
I love that.
I guess,
But
yeah, I
this,
mean,
some bands, they have a certain sound for a certain song, and that's the patch, and
yep.
that's the sound for the song. And whether it's, a pre-recorded patch or whether it's, made up at the time. Years ago, when I was writing for Keyboard, I interviewed a guy that played Moog with Snoop Dogg, and he said that there's no recall in the older Moogs, and he said Snoop would call a song, and he'd have to know how to dial that patch in right there and have it like right then, and that to me is a lot of pressure. you
Oh
know,
yeah, totally. I'm not sure whether I would want to bring up a West Coast lead with
no.
Snoop Dogg going like, the line to play, and be like, I know the line to play, but I'm not sure what sound is going to come out of
And you have to be
it.
confident before you play it that you got the sound all dialed in. So that I
Yeah,
think it was
right.
Fred Reck might have been his name. But everything's different for everybody. If you have a presets versus doing what you're doing, there is a lot more of that. The reason why you guys sound different night after night and is because of that, and because of that feeling that it doesn't have to sound the same. It can be the same melody, but it's going to be in this patch tonight. So you don't in a band like yours have a dedication to the sound that was on the record to reproduce that exactly live more so than the part and then see where it goes from there. Or do you?
I I mean, listen, the JP 8000 out of all the synths has been with me from the very beginning.
I remember.
Not I'm sure you do. Not the same one. I've gone through many along the way.
Yep.
And yeah, there are certain, you know, songs, Jigsaw Earth, I feel like has to have that bell tone from the JP 88.
Yep.
But, but even I, maybe it's an age thing too. I kind of stopped caring about all that, and then also when I like during the pandemic when it was just me and needed to do something with my time and was like
Yep.
arranging biscuit songs for piano and
Right.
kind of all that, like I realized that these songs don't have to obviously be on that instrument that was played on, and now I'm
Right.
playing like bass lines and guitar lines on piano. And there's been discussion even like, okay, can we do this crazy stage rig that the Disco Biscuits have on a smaller rig,
Yep.
and in the last couple of years, like just challenge myself and be like, okay, like let's see what I can do everything just on like this stack and avoid that stack entirely,
How
right?
cool.
And I'm kind of like I'm kind of there, it was a little
Yeah.
bit out of necessity. It was also like kind of like we were talking about before, like, hey man, there's lots of great bell tones on all of these
Right.
synths, and they all
Right.
have different flavors. Like,
Yeah.
why am I so married to the JB 8000's bell,
Right. Yeah.
So,
And there's something about that idea when you're I think people who are listening to this conversation that are afraid to, let loose or take chances, they're so, they got their main stage or whatever and they just have their patches. I think that challenging yourself is such an underrated thing. I think I don't, people's own fears or their ideas of their
yeah,
own limitations. When you
yeah,
challenge yourself in a studio, that's one thing. At home, that's one thing. When you challenge yourself live on stage and cut the ropes to where you were and go with sounds and creating sounds in the moment, there's a scariness to that. But now you've done that
yeah.
long enough where you're like, I got my zone, I know my knobs, I know my gear. If that one goes down, I got this one, you know.
I mean, I would probably say if there wasn't a receptive audience in front of me for the last couple of decades, that I would probably still exist in those limitations and fears that you talk about.
Yeah.
And like honestly, to any younger musicians that are listening to this, from a couple of now, are we aging? Like, how do we even describe ourselves? I'm approaching 50. Are you 50 yet?
We're evolving. We're getting into that realm where we soon become the
Wizards.
older statesman, right? Well, I got to grow the long beard again. But
I mean, you're almost there with the hair.
so
Um,
let me ask you,
yeah.
what is a non-musical interest or influence that has most influenced your musical self? Could be a book, could be nature, could be a sport, could be anything, but something that influenced your music that's not. necessarily musical?
Empathy.
Oh, that's a great answer. That's a great answer.
You
Um,
know, and
wow.
I don't even know how to expound upon that.
Oh, sure you do.
Oh God. Okay.
I mean,
Um, I feel. Well, number one, with empathy, there's a little bit of like, forgiveness, right? Forgiveness of like, yourself and forgiveness
sure.
of, other people and,
Yeah,
and all that. There's a little bit of like, um l- l- listen, I play in a group situation,
right,
right? And so I feel like in order to understand how the group operates, we also to varying extents understand how the individuals operate,
right,
and therefore you could kind of understand how that individual operates within the context of the group. And
right.
so, with a little bit more empathy, you have a little bit more filters to kind of like, see that.
Yep.
Um, and I think it all gets reflected in your playing. I mean, I'm sure we've all played in tense environments or where, we individually have been distracted by, life's events and not really, paying attention to what we should be paying attention to in the music.
Yeah.
And same thing there, right? Like if you have like, even the empathy for like, yeah, man, there is a whole world and lots of different people that live in this world outside of the friggin' music that we're playing right now,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
why do I think this matters even so much? But it matters to me, and
Yeah.
it matters to other people too. I mean, listen, I've been blessed to have a fan base that has, been able to support a career for 3 decades, and
Yeah.
I am truly appreciative of that. But what I'm most appreciative of is when somebody comes over to me and they, tell me how our music has changed their life in a positive way, right? Whether that's, by the people that they've met through the scene and, their best friends or their spouse or,
Right.
the business plans or whatever, or being at I get this all the time. Like I was really at a low point in my life and, I listened to this show or this song and it got me through it, right? And
Right.
these are in order to relay it to me, they're relaying it with the same passion that they had with that song. So I'm
Right.
able to sort of get it. So yeah, man. I mean, I know I'm distracting from your question a little
No, it's
bit, but
great.
like, if we're like, what's the reason we're all here? Like, I don't know. I don't think any of us know, but like maybe to like influence each other in some sort of positive way, known or unknown,
Right.
right?
I mean,
To ourselves or
music
to the other
attracts.
person.
Yeah, I mean,
And
look, we attract people with music, right? So your audience is attracted to you in a way that if you were just standing in the club, they wouldn't all, come up and be so rapturous. So we identify with music, and I'm sure. And let's go back to when you started going to concerts. Did your parents take you to concerts when you were young at all?
um, I feel like when I started getting going to concerts, I was getting chaperoned, and then like when I was unable to get a chaperone, I would take a parent. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, 89 Rolling Stones, Steel Wheels tour, and same, like, 12, 13 years old.
Yeah.
Division Bell, I think, was that year too.
Yeah.
Um, again, going to Dead concerts with like camp counselors and stuff like that.
Oh, cool.
But also, brought my mom to that same, 3-day run at the Spectrum.
Sweet.
Remember somebody like passing her a joint, and like, I mean, I was definitely way too young to even like think about it, but like
Right.
she like looked at it and she was like, "Ah, it's past my time," and like handed it back to the guy, and I was like, "That's cool."
Yeah. What's
um
what's a concert from back in those days that you still talk about to this day? That you just like such a critical show at a critical time for you.
mm, okay. I remember seeing with my father, because my dad was big into like taking me out to jazz shows and stuff. I remember him taking me to see Harry Connick Jr. at this like what's basically a club on South Street, and it was
All right.
well before Harry met Sally, right? So he was just this like 18-year-old kid from New Orleans, probably on his first tour,
Right. Yeah.
and destroyed that place, right?
Yeah.
And for me, looking at this like, white piano player,
Right.
kid piano player
Right.
even, right? I was like, "Oh my God, like okay, here we go." That was powerful, and I
Yeah.
can't remember whether you had a trio with him or whether it's just solo, but it was powerful. My dad also, this is probably my biggest feather in the hat, took me to the Academy of Music and saw Miles Davis.
Oh, wow. Very
So that
cool.
was that was really cool.
Did
Uh-huh.
did you understand what Miles was or was doing at the time, or was it just like, wow, this is cool? Like,
No, I definitely got it because I was already into Amandla, which I think was the tour or Tutu, whatever. It was
yep.
sometime around then, and he was like in his red trumpet phase and everything like that,
Right.
So, um, yeah, I probably didn't realize like how cool it was that I was, seeing that, but I
Yeah.
was definitely into Miles at the time.
That's cool.
Um, and I know it's like jazz, but I remember my parents taking me up to like the New York jazz clubs, as a kid, and that just
Yeah.
being like influential of like what that vibe was,
Yeah.
you know. Um, my first concert was at it was like after the Temple football game by the Beach Boys. That was
Oh,
fun.
cool. Nice. So once you started going to shows on your own, what was a band you saw whose music you were really familiar with that you were like excited to see and you knew the tunes and you hit it?
I mean, Grateful Dead. Like, I
That was
can't,
the
I
one.
can't really, yeah, I
Yeah.
can't really say anything else, right?
Yeah.
Like I saw the Grateful Dead, like a lot of times before, 1995, and that was in a, pretty young place in my life.
Yeah.
And it just like opened my eyes to like the scene. Like I had no idea that that type of scene could like exist around something as intangible as music,
Yeah.
and that type of community. And I was definitely attracted to it. I was always attracted to counterculture stuff,
Yep.
and I think I still very much view the world through that lens.
Sure.
Especially since I've always kind of like, been the salmon swimming upstream in this life, right? Of, figuring out how to make something work and not have to
Right.
work for the man or anything like that.
Right.
What other, so, definitely some Fish, right? Like,
Yep.
I've always been more Grateful Dead than Fish. I do love Fish. I think that, their creativity is stunning. Their sustained creativity is stunning. I, also appreciate all of their musicianship and their, commitment to the art form of improvisation,
Total commitment.
throughout all these years.
Yeah.
I never really got on that bandwagon. As many shows as I've seen, I've never really got on that bandwagon the way that, so many of my friends have.
Sure.
But I've certainly have seen my fair share of Fish concerts.
Right on.
I think that concerts that I still talk about in the last 10, 15 years is Paul McCartney at Bonnaroo.
Oh yeah.
Um, and that was the first time that I saw Paul. And after that, I was like, oh my God, there's a living Beatle, and he's awesome, and
Yeah.
also has like fireworks at the end of his show and lasers during Mr. Kite. Like, oh my God, this is incredible.
Yeah.
But and also, listen, it was at Bonnaroo, and I was, with a lot of friends, and there's obviously a lot of young people at Bonnaroo, more so
Right.
than the other Paul McCartney concerts that I
Right.
saw, and understanding how music can be fluid, through generations, I
Yep.
thought was fascinating.
Yeah.
And I think about that too when I'm going to, Dead and Company shows, and I see, Deadhead grandma and, teenage Deadhead kids, and,
Yeah.
these cross generations. I think that's beautiful.
That's like
Um,
what music lasts is interesting because as you get past the heyday of certain bands when they had their moment, Grand Funk Railroad sold out Shea Stadium faster than the Beatles, and now they're relatively a footnote if anybody knows about them modern times. Um, what band are you surprised kind of fell off the radar that you're like, man, I thought they would kind of always be a little more known. It's really everything before 2000, but
I still question like and I know all the information about it, but I still question the necessity of Pink Floyd not being able to, like, make some more music together, or
Right.
Led Zeppelin not being able to make some music together. And I know that that one's different than, say, Simon and Garfunkel, same thing. Like,
Yeah.
come on, guys,
Right.
like, you can figure this out and just sing some pretty songs and some
Right.
trying times, to get us through.
Yep.
Um, so, not to say that I need more Simon and Garfunkel in my life. I think I've had enough Simon and Garfunkel, but, if
Yeah.
there was going to be, listen, I thought that with, even when they put out new Beatles tracks, like, I thought I had enough Beatles tracks, and, those new-ish ones aren't
Yep.
the best Beatles tracks, but man, that's so fucking cool. There's like
Yeah.
new Beatles songs that even has John on it, all these years
Yeah.
later. It's so cool.
It's interesting when people they get to a certain age and like, why aren't the Rolling Stones putting out records like all the time, like they used to? And Bill, Elton John in the early '70s, he had a period of like 3 years where he put out some of his best records, like two at a time, three at a time, like every
Mm.
year. And then they go 10 years at a time without putting out a record because again, it's the business. They have to work one record as a cycle. I liked the last Stones record, but it's kind of one
Yep.
of these things you wonder, why are these people taking so much time not doing music? Like, what are you doing?
I,
You know,
I I mean, right? Like, it's time to get to it, It's clearly a short life, and there's a lot of music to be made.
well, even that
Um,
one Billy Joel song that he came out with, finally a new Billy Joel song is actually really good, but just one song in 30 plus years. He had recorded for less time than he had since he stopped recording. And you go like, what are
t-
you doing? Are you holding on to like a box set for when you die? Like, here's all the stuff I made. I just didn't think it would hold up to the stranger. So like,
it's a good song too.
yeah, really good.
It's a
Um,
good song. I remember that one. Yeah.
I don't know what's, so many artists, their early stuff is the stuff and their later stuff just they can't capture that magic. Whereas there are bands, like I like a lot of Fish's later stuff. One of my favorite bands, Sloan, I like their later stuff. So are there bands that you like that you feel their later stuff is as crucial as some of their earlier stuff? And they've managed to hold on to that spark or that magic.
Uh, uh, I'm sure, but now it's like, he's in all the movies. Oh, name one.
Right.
Ah,
No, but it's hard because
all of them.
there's much more examples of bands that just stopped creating at the level that they did, or artists, songwriters, lyricists. You could talk about a Dylan or a McCartney. You listen to McCartney 3, which he did during the pandemic, and he played all the instruments. You still hear that finger painting guy. You still hear that guy
100%.
like, oh, what's this sound? Oh, what's this sound?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
hearing that versus being able to write something as critical as yesterday are in a way two different things. But I love the spirit. But at
Yeah,
the same time,
absolutely.
it's hard to figure out a band whose later stuff is as critical as their early stuff. So why do people fall off? What happens?
Well, I mean, arguably, it's a young man's game, right? Of you're more creative in your formative years when you're more inspired by the unknowns of life, and before you get into your grudges of life, or your
But wouldn't you get
routines, or
wouldn't you get better at what you're doing? Like, wouldn't it go to like
yeah,
I
no, that's yeah, that's the conundrum, right?
there's a story I
With
tell of a
more
produ
experience and more knowledge.
one of the
Uh-huh.
first producers I worked with told me your best songs are ahead of you. And at the time I took it as a slight because I was like, these songs are great, but
Mm,
I always want to feel that way. The stuff that I'm going to
right.
write this year, I'm going to write some amazing, incredible stuff. I'm going to challenge myself. I'm going to grow. So I have that mentality, but maybe it's fame, maybe it's money, maybe it's substances, maybe it's relationships, it's all the business, it's all the other things that take people away from
Mm.
that act of really just genuine creation. And very few people, aside from McCartney, seem to have that ability to just dip back in and have fun. It's like, okay, now everybody's listening to every word that I write. Now everybody expects a yesterday. So what do I? So I remember in many instances just kind of wondering, like, why isn't this new stuff as good as that old stuff? And
Well, it's number one, perspective, and how you identify with it, right?
right.
So, let's take the McCartney example. Was that the one that he did for, like, the video game?
Um,
Didn't he, like, do the music for a video game or something like
no,
that?
it was just McCartney 3 because McCartney and then McCartney 2 and McCartney 3, those were just him making
Okay.
his own music.
So, and then, did he play any of those songs, at the next Paul McCartney concerts during the album cycle.
He may have felt, everybody's going to want to hear
Compelled
all the
to.
classics, so
Abs
they might have room for one or two, but that's it.
Right. And he and everybody else knows I don't know the song.
Right,
Just play the song that I know.
right.
Right. And it's for I think a similar reason that, even as artists, I don't think that I'll speak for myself.
Yeah,
I don't think that I push my uh musical palette of what I am influenced by as much as I should as a creative, and I think that that is only a product of my age, right? I think that I identify more with the music that I know that I like and that I identify with, or music that was very impressionable upon me in my formative years, right? That's a
right,
really big thing for all of us.
right.
We love that band, whether it's Nirvana or Funkadelic or whatever it is that was
Right,
like so important to us in our formative years and
right.
will continue into or classic rock is a great example of that,
Yeah,
right? And you'll go into your adult years not knowing who Sabrina Carpenter is, and that's I think okay.
yep.
But like but you certainly know all the Grand Funk Railroad songs there are to know.
Right.
um
Yeah.
so
It's nostalgia. It's a powerful thing. That's why the music that you're exposed to when you're young is so important. So like your
right.
kids and my kids, since we're musicians, have heard more music just around the house than most kids would in a non-musical household. But I find that the good stuff, it works. Like if I don't
Yeah.
care what genre or what song, if it's a great song, that kid's gonna not be able to stop singing it because it still has it,
Yeah. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
currency, which
Yeah.
I love. So I want to wrap up and asking, I got a term that I like to come to, and this I got from really David Bowie for me. Uh, an artist that gave you that kind of self-permission to be free as an artist. So watching a guy like Bowie transform into Ziggy Stardust, then transform into the Thin White Duke, and watching somebody exhibit so much, and I use that term self-permission.
Mm.
What would be an artist or a band that really contributed to you opening the width of what you've become?
Probably Frank Zappa.
Very
You
cool.
know, it
How so?
it it well, so probably the reason that, I'm in a jam band is because I have all these influences of music that I enjoy playing and listening to and everything like that. And
Yeah,
I feel like Frank was somebody that, took that craft seriously but not seriously at the same time,
yeah,
and, able to blend genres together where like they didn't even necessarily matter anymore what the genre was that you were playing, and it was
right,
just music. And it was all these like well-informed musicians, even learning more
right,
about themselves and about group playing and
right.
some really, complicated stuff in there. And not to say I'm attracted to that, but I respect that,
Yeah,
especially for somebody that, on the outside didn't take himself too seriously,
yeah.
you know? Right? And because, again, it's music, like, it's mostly self-fulfilling, right? And
But it
hopefully we get other people that have the same type of response to it.
100%. Well, a guy like Zappa, a guy like Bowie, these are people who they were able to break from any one genre so that their name, like what's Frank Zappa's music? It's Frank Zappa music, you know?
Right.
So, what would you say would be another band besides Bowie and Zappa where or the band or the artist where their name is their genre?
I
Think.
mean, Miles and Jazz, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
kind of synonymous with each other.
Well, a Thelonious Monk, like with the piano. So with instruments, with guitars, you can put a lot of effects and stuff. With an acoustic piano, to sound like, oh yeah, that's Monk. Right away, that's
Sure.
hard. That's really
Yeah.
hard. To
Yeah.
be
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
identifiable notes in. That's hard. So, and there's not many people like that because a lot of times,
100%.
unless you're deep into like McCoy Tyner and you go, okay, that's McCoy, that's Dodo Marmarosa, and you know that different names. As first you listen, it's
I
just a
feel
bunch of
like even a
jazz.
neophyte can be like, oh, that sounds, like the cluster chords and the atonals and the
Right,
like everybody else is kind of doing, rhythm sections doing what everybody else is like doing,
right,
right?
yeah,
But like that piano is distinctively Thelonious,
yep.
for sure. Yeah,
Well, I
100%. Great
I
call.
think you guys as the Disco Biscuits, whether
We're
you
the
call it
Thelonious of jam bands.
well, no, whether you call it Bisco or Transfusion, both names that I love, I think you guys have become identifiable and have kind of developed a sound. And I've seen and heard a lot of jam bands, and everybody has a sound. Some of them are a little more maybe generic than others, but you guys
Yeah.
have evolved. You've switched drummers, and different things have happened to push you along. But the genesis of what you are has become this thing that I love, and I find it unique, and I love to see you guys play. So I hope you come back out west sometime soon.
Thanks, Robbie. I mean, it's just crazy to still be doing it after, 30 plus years with the same band,
Don't stop now.
Yeah, it's the only thing I know.
Yeah, well, I know you got to get in the studio. I thank you so much for your time. You're awesome. And let's do this again sometime, casually and
Please.
unprofessionally.
Love it. I love it. Thank you, Robbie. It is wonderful to see you again, old friend.
You too.